The sun had just begun its slow climb over the rooftops of a quiet Virginia town. Golden light spilled through the wide glass windows of the Brew, a cozy little coffee shop that had been standing for decades. Inside, the air carried the rich aroma of freshly ground beans, warm pastries, and the faint sweetness of cinnamon. It was a Sunday morning ritual for the town. Families, couples, and students filling the wooden tables, their voices blending into a soft, comfortable hum. The hiss of the espresso machine and the gentle clinking of mugs created a rhythm as familiar as a heartbeat. On one side of the shop, framed black and white photographs lined the walls. Snapshots of the town's history, Main Street in the 1950s, high school football teams from long ago, and portraits of local boys in uniform heading off to wars overseas. One photo near the counter showed a young Marine in Vietnam, his face steady with the kind of quiet courage only those who've seen battle could wear. Most customers walked past without noticing, but the regulars knew exactly who it was. Ray Thompson, Pops to the locals, sat in his usual seat by the window, the same spot he'd claimed every Sunday morning for over 10 years. At 68, Ray was as much a part of the Brew as the old oak tables themselves. His silver hair was neatly combed, his flannel shirt tucked with precision, and on his jacket gleamed a small Marine Corps pin. His left sleeve was pinned up just below the elbow, a silent reminder of the arm he'd lost in Vietnam in 1970. Yet nothing about him seemed broken. His posture was upright, his blue eyes sharp as steel, scanning the pages of a worn paperback about World War II. Every movement carried quiet discipline. Even now, decades later, the habits of a Marine had never left him. He was alert, aware, and ready, though no one in the room realized it. In the far corner, another man sat quietly. Younger, dressed simply in jeans, a black t-shirt, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He looked like any other customer, sipping his latte, half distracted by his laptop screen. But Daniel Rivera was no ordinary man. At 32, he was a tomb guard at Arlington National Cemetery, one of the elite soldiers trusted to keep vigil over the unknown soldier. Today was his day off. Nobody here knew who he was. Nobody knew what he was trained to do, and nobody in the peaceful cafe had any idea how quickly that calm morning was about to shatter. The warm calm of that Sunday morning didn't last. At exactly 8:27 a.m., the sound came, a low growl at first, faint in the distance like a storm rumbling over the horizon. It grew louder, closer, until the very glass of the cafe windows began to tremble. The hiss of the espresso machine was drowned out by the roar of motorcycle engines. 5 of them, thundering down Main Street like predators on the hunt. Conversations trailed off. Forks hovered midair. Even the college kids buried in their textbooks looked up. The hum of peace inside the Brew evaporated in seconds. The door swung open with a force that made the bell above it clang sharp and jarring. Heads turned as 5 men strode inside, their heavy boots thumping against the hardwood floor. Leather jackets creaked with every step. Chains clinked. Tattoos stretched across thick forearms and shaved skulls. These weren't just bikers out for a ride. These were men who carried chaos with them, and everyone in the cafe knew it instantly. At the front was Jake Malone, though most people in the county knew him only by his road name, Razor. 6'4", built like a wall with arms thick as tree trunks and a scar running down his cheek. His eyes carried that cold glint of someone who enjoyed being feared. Behind him followed Tommy, Spike, Mitch, and Carl, the rest of the Iron Reapers, a biker crew that had been making headlines in the local sheriff's reports for weeks. Bars, gas stations, even a church fundraiser, they'd left their mark everywhere they went. Now they were here. Lena Harper, the 50-year-old owner of the Brew, stiffened behind the counter. She tried to mask the flash of fear in her eyes, but her knuckles whitened around the coffee pot she held. The older couple sharing blueberry muffins froze mid-conversation, their smiles fading into silence. 2 students in the corner instinctively hunched lower over their books as if invisibility could save them. The Reapers didn't notice, or maybe they didn't care. Their boots pounded across the floor as Razor's gaze swept the cafe, scanning each table like a wolf deciding which lamb to tear apart first. And then his eyes landed on the window seat, Ray Thompson. Pops, the old Marine. Razor smirked, his lip curling with contempt. To him, Ray wasn't a veteran or a symbol of quiet strength. He was just an easy target, an old man with one arm sitting in the best spot in the shop. Razor turned his bulk toward the table and began walking, each step echoing louder than the last. His crew followed close behind, their shadows stretching long across the floor. The silence in the cafe thickened, pressing down on every chest. Ray glanced up from his book, calm as ever, blue eyes steady. He closed the paperback carefully, folding the corner of the page to mark his place, then rested his hand on the warm ceramic mug in front of him. No fear, no flinch, just quiet composure. Razor stopped at the edge of the table, looming like a storm cloud. His voice cut across the cafe, sharp and mean. "Hey, old man, you're in my seat. Move it." The words hung heavy in the air. A couple gasped quietly. Someone dropped a spoon into their saucer. Lena swallowed hard, her throat dry. But Ray didn't move. Didn't even blink. He looked up at Razor the way he might have looked at a green recruit barking too loud on his first day. Calm. Patient. A man who had seen worse. Dan Rivera, in the corner, lifted his eyes from his laptop. He had felt the tension before the words were even spoken. His gaze flicked to Ray, then to Razor, then to the Marine Corps pin glinting on Ray's jacket. A storm was building, and Dan knew it. His heartbeat stayed steady, but his muscles coiled like springs beneath his plain black t-shirt. The peaceful hum of the brew was gone, and in its place, danger now stood tall and grinning, leather-clad and hungry for trouble. For a long second, the cafe seemed to forget how to breathe. Razor stood over the table like a thundercloud, his crew spreading behind him in a half-circle, blocking out the light from the windows. The coffee shop that had moments ago been filled with the quiet comfort of a Sunday morning now sat in a chokehold of silence. Ray Thompson didn't flinch. The 68-year-old veteran who had faced jungles on fire and nights that bled into chaos simply looked up at the towering biker and spoke with a calm, steady drawl. "I've been sitting here every Sunday for 10 years, son," Ray said. His one hand rested lightly on his coffee mug, the warmth seeping into his palm. "Plenty of other tables. Pick one." A low murmur rippled through the cafe. The older couple at the corner stiffened. The students in the back exchanged wide-eyed glances, and Lena behind the counter whispered a silent prayer. Razor's smirk vanished. His expression hardened, a sneer twisting his scarred face. The cafe lights caught the ink on his arms, tattoos of skulls and reapers etched in crude black. His voice rose, cutting through the air like a blade. "You deaf? Or just stupid?" Razor barked, leaning closer until his shadow swallowed Ray whole. "This is my table now. You get up or I drag you out myself." The silence grew heavier. Every customer felt it pressing down on their chest. The clink of a spoon, the hiss of milk steaming, normal sounds of the cafe were gone. The world had shrunk to one old Marine and one angry biker. Ray didn't blink. He took a slow sip of his coffee, set the cup back down with care, and met Razor's glare head-on. His blue eyes held no fear, only patience. "Only strength. I'm not looking for trouble," Ray said evenly. "But I'm not moving either. I earned my place here a long time ago." The words landed with weight, but Razor didn't respect weight. He respected power. The biker's laugh barked out harsh and ugly, echoing against the cafe walls. His crew joined in, their voices filling the space with jeers. Tommy cracked his knuckles, Spike muttered something crude, and Carl tilted his head like a vulture waiting to feed. "Earned it?" Razor sneered. "What, you some kind of war hero?" He leaned in closer, his breath hot and bitter with smoke. "You're just an old cripple taking up space. Nobody cares what you earned." The insult hit like a slap across the room. The college kids shrank deeper into their seats. Lena took an uncertain step forward, clutching the coffee pot like it could shield her. "Jake, that's enough," she said, her voice shaking but brave. "Leave him alone. He's a good man." Razor snapped his head toward her, eyes burning with menace. "Stay out of this, Lena, unless you want trouble too." The cafe owner froze, pale and silent. Razor turned back to Ray, a cruel grin spreading across his face. He reached down suddenly, snatching the Marine Corps pin from Ray's jacket. The small metal emblem gleamed in his fist for a moment, then clattered against the hardwood as Razor flicked it to the floor. The sound was sharp, metallic, final. Gasps filled the cafe. The Marine pin skidded to a stop near the counter, glinting under the lights. Ray's eyes followed it, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. That small piece of metal wasn't just jewelry. It was memory. It was sacrifice. It was brothers in arms who never came home. But still, Ray didn't move. Razor wasn't done. He grabbed Ray's coffee mug and flipped it over, spilling steaming black liquid across the book on the table. Pages soaked instantly, ink bleeding, the smell of scorched paper rising into the air. The coffee dripped down onto the floor, pooling at Ray's boots. The crash of ceramic on wood echoed like a gunshot. Lena gasped. The older couple flinched. The students froze, too scared to blink. For the first time, a twitch crossed Ray's cheek. He stared at the ruined book, then at the pin on the floor. Memories of Vietnam flickered unbidden. Gunfire cracking through the jungle. Brothers falling at his side. The blast that had taken his arm but not his will to fight. He breathed once, slowly, and lifted his gaze back to Razor. "You think you scare me," Ray said quietly, his voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "Son, I've faced worse than you and I'm still here." The words cut through Razor's arrogance, slicing it thin. But pride made him push harder. His sneer deepened as he leaned closer. Big talk for a broken old man. Across the cafe, Dan Rivera closed his laptop with a soft click. His eyes, hidden beneath the brim of his cap, had been tracking every second. He had watched the pin hit the floor, watched the mug shatter piece into chaos, watched the biker loom over a man who deserved respect, not humiliation. Dan's jaw tightened. His body shifted forward, casual but controlled, like a predator readying its strike. He slid his chair back, the scrape of wood against floor drawing Razor's attention. For the first time, the biker noticed him. "What's this?" Razor barked, his voice carrying an edge of annoyance. "You got a problem, buddy?" Dan didn't rush. He rose with deliberate calm, his movements precise, like a soldier who'd learned the value of patience. His hands rested loose at his sides, his posture relaxed but grounded. When he spoke, his voice carried no fear, only quiet authority. "Yeah," Dan said, his tone steady, edged with a faint Texas drawl. "I do." The room froze again. Eyes darted between the massive biker and the unassuming man in jeans and a t-shirt. "You're messing with a man who doesn't deserve it," Dan continued. His gaze locked on Razor. "Pick up his pin, apologize, walk away." The words hung in the air, charged with electricity. No one in the cafe knew yet. No one had any idea. But Razor and his crew were about to learn. The cafe's silence cracked under the weight of Dan's words. Razor blinked once, caught off guard by the calm defiance in the stranger's tone. He had expected fear, hesitation, maybe pleading. Instead, he was staring into the steady gaze of a man who looked utterly unshaken. The other biker shifted uneasily. Tommy scratched at the back of his neck, his heavy leather vest creaking as he muttered, "Boss, maybe let's just grab a table?" "Shut it," Razor snapped without breaking eye contact. His pride was a beast that wouldn't allow retreat. "Nobody tells me what to do. Especially not some nobody in a ball cap." He took a step closer to Dan, puffing his chest, trying to crush him with sheer presence. But Dan didn't move. His stance was loose, balanced, the posture of someone who had spent years drilling control into instinct. "I'll say it one more time," Dan repeated evenly. "Pick up the pin, apologize, walk away." Razor barked a laugh, cruel and sharp. "Or what, you gonna cry about it?" He shoved Dan's shoulder hard enough to make the nearby tables rattle. Gasps shot through the room. The older couple clutched hands. Lena froze behind the counter, her breath trapped in her chest. Dan's body swayed with the push but didn't stumble. His head tilted slightly, eyes narrowing just a fraction. When he spoke again, his voice dropped, quiet as a fuse being lit. "Last chance." The words sank into the air like stones into deep water. Razor snarled. "That's it." He swung, a meaty fist arcing toward Dan's face with the speed and rage of a man used to ending fights in one blow. But Dan wasn't there. In a blur, he shifted sideways, letting the punch slice through empty air. His hand snapped up, palm striking Razor's wrist with surgical precision, redirecting the biker's momentum past him. Razor stumbled forward, his balance ripped away in an instant. Before he could recover, Dan's elbow hooked up under Razor's arm, twisting it just enough to send the biker crashing against the table with a grunt of shock. Coffee mugs toppled, silverware clattered to the floor. The cafe erupted in chaos. Customers screamed. Chairs scraped back. Someone shouted, "Call the police!" Tommy lunged first, a massive arm swinging like a sledgehammer toward Dan's head. Dan ducked low, pivoted on his heel, and drove his shoulder into Tommy's gut. The biker wheezed, folding in half as Dan's hand caught the back of his neck and sent him sprawling across two chairs. Spike rushed in next, grabbing for Dan's arm. Dan twisted, using Spike's own grip against him, and yanked him forward into a brutal knee strike. The crack of impact made the students in the back wince. Spike collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. Carl hesitated, eyes darting to his fallen brothers. "Boss?" he barked, panic bleeding into his voice. Razor roared, ripping himself upright, face red with rage. "Get him! All of you!" But the fight had already shifted. Dan moved like a current of water, every step flowing into the next. He wasn't brawling. He wasn't throwing wild punches. He was controlling space, redirecting force, using precision instead of brute strength. Razor charged again, swinging wildly. Dan slipped past him, caught his arm, and with a swift twist sent the biker slamming into the counter. The wood groaned under the impact. Lena yelped but ducked safely behind the espresso machine. Ray, still seated, watched with steady eyes. For the first time, the faintest smile touched his lips. The Marine recognized discipline when he saw it. Dan wasn't just a fighter. He was trained, professional, controlled. The bikers staggered, groaning on the floor, trying to rise. Razor wiped blood from his lip, his fury blinding him. He grabbed a chair, lifting it high, ready to smash it down on Dan. Dan stepped forward, calm as ever. His hand shot up, seizing the chair leg mid-swing. For a breathless moment, the two men locked eyes, the brute force of Razor against the unshakable calm of the guard. "Sit down," Dan said, his voice low, final, and with a sharp twist. He wrenched the chair from Razor's hands and sent it crashing to the floor. The cafe erupted with shouts, customers rushing toward the door, phones out, recording. The fight had crossed a line now. It wasn't just about a table. It wasn't even about respect. It was about who would break first. And Razor had no idea. He was facing a man who never broke. The cafe floor was chaos. Chairs overturned, mugs shattered, and frightened customers huddled near the exit. Cell phones glowed as shaky hands recorded the scene, every angle capturing the impossible sight. One calm stranger holding his ground against 5 seasoned bikers. For a brief second, silence returned. Razor stood hunched near the counter, chest heaving, lip split. His crew groaned on the floor, Tommy clutching his stomach, Spike wheezing, Carl frozen with uncertainty. The weight of humiliation pressed down on them thicker than smoke. Razor's pride burned hotter than pain. His voice cracked like a whip. "Get up.
All of you!"
We finish this now." The command lit fire under the bikers. Tommy staggered to his feet, rage tightening his fists. Spike wiped blood from his nose, his eyes flashing murder. Even Carl, the most hesitant, clenched his jaw and stepped forward. They circled Dan this time, learning from their mistake. No more one by one. They would swarm him, overwhelm him, crush him with sheer numbers. But Dan's posture never changed. His shoulders relaxed, knees slightly bent, weight balanced. His chest rose and fell with calm rhythm, like a soldier pacing his breath before pulling the trigger. His cap shaded his eyes, but when he spoke, his words cut clear. "You still don't get it," Dan said quietly. "This isn't a fight you can win." Razor roared and charged first. Tommy and Spike followed, a wall of fury closing in. The cafe gasped as chaos exploded again. Dan sidestepped Razor's wild swing, hooking his arm and spinning him into Spike's path. The two collided, crashing into a table that splintered under their weight. Before Tommy's fist could land, Dan caught his wrist mid-air, twisted sharply, and dropped him to his knees with a clean joint lock. Tommy screamed in pain, his free hand clawing at empty air. Carl lunged from behind with a chair, desperate to land a blow. Without looking, Dan shifted, ducked low, and drove his elbow back into Carl's ribs. The chair slipped from his hands as the biker doubled over, gasping for breath. Razor roared again, pulling himself free from the wreckage of the table. His fury made him sloppy, swinging with reckless power. Dan slipped under the arc, planting a controlled strike into Razor's chest. The biker stumbled, his breath knocked out, crashing backward into the counter. The cafe echoed with the sound of bodies hitting wood and floor. Customers cheered now, some shouting encouragement, others chanting, "Take him down." The tide had turned, but Dan didn't smile. He didn't gloat. His movements remained efficient, calculated. Every strike was measured, designed to end the threat without excess. He wasn't here to entertain. He was here to protect. Ray watched from his seat, pride swelling quietly in his chest. He recognized the discipline, the restraint. Dan wasn't just a fighter, he was something else, something most people couldn't name. But Ray knew. He had seen men like this before. Soldiers. Guardians. Razor staggered upright again, chest heaving, sweat dripping down his temple. His crew lay sprawled, broken around him. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. Dan stepped forward, closing the distance, his presence heavy, unshakable. "This ends now," Dan said firmly. The words cut sharper than any blow. Razor, breathing hard, realized the truth. He had thrown everything he had, and it wasn't enough. But pride wouldn't let him stop. Not yet. He spat blood onto the floor, squared his shoulders, and snarled through broken breath. "You're dead, soldier boy." Dan's eyes narrowed. For the first time, his cap lifted just slightly, revealing the steel in his gaze, and Razor finally saw it, the calm fire of a man who stood guard over the sacred, who bowed to no one, who lived by an oath that couldn't be broken. The line had been crossed. The game was over. Now it was judgment. The cafe was wreckage. Tables splintered, mugs shattered, chairs overturned. Spike groaned on the floor. Tommy clutched his arm. Carl was doubled over near the counter. The only two men still standing were Razor and Dan, and every eye in the cafe was locked on them. Razor wiped blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. His chest heaved, every breath ragged. Sweat streaked through the grime on his face, but his eyes still burned with pride, with fury, with the kind of blind rage that refused to admit defeat. Dan, in contrast, stood steady. His breaths came slow, controlled. His stance never wavered. He looked like a man carved from stone. Calm, grounded, unshakable. The two men circled each other in the ruined cafe, silence pressing down like a storm about to break. "You think you've won?" Razor spat, his voice raw. "You humiliate me? You humiliate my brothers in front of all these people?" His hand clenched into a trembling fist. "Nobody disrespects me and walks away." Dan's voice cut through, low but firm. "Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn, and you just lost it." Razor roared, charging with every ounce of strength left in him. His fists came like sledgehammers, wild and heavy. Dan slipped sideways, deflecting one blow with a sharp parry, ducking under another, moving with precision that made Razor look clumsy. But Razor didn't stop. He swung again and again, each strike heavier, sloppier, driven by desperation. Dan absorbed the rhythm, studying him like a soldier studying an enemy line. Then, he struck. A clean, sharp palm strike to Razor's chest sent the biker stumbling back. Before Razor could recover, Dan's leg swept low, hooking his ankle and sending him crashing to the ground. The cafe floor shook as Razor hit hard, groaning in pain. Gasps filled the room. Some cheered, others whispered, "It's over." But Razor wasn't done. With a guttural yell, he pushed himself up, staggering to his feet. His pride was bleeding more than his body, and he couldn't stop. He reached for a broken chair leg, brandishing it like a club. Dan's eyes hardened. He stepped forward, hands raised, calm but ready. "Don't," he warned. But Razor swung anyway. Dan caught the strike midair, his grip like iron. In one motion, he twisted the weapon free and snapped it in half across his knee. The crack echoed like thunder. He tossed the pieces aside, and before Razor could react, delivered a controlled strike. Just enough force to send the biker crashing to the floor again, gasping, defeated. This time, Razor stayed down. His chest rose and fell in shuddering waves. His fists unclenched. The fight was gone. Dan stood over him, silent. He didn't gloat. He didn't taunt. He simply looked down with the calm authority of a man who knew restraint was the greatest weapon of all. Finally, he spoke. "You came in here looking for fear, but all you found was your own weakness." The cafe was still heavy with awe. Phones lowered. Customers watched not just a fight, but a lesson. Razor groaned, rolling onto his side. His pride lay in pieces, scattered like the wreckage around him. He met Dan's gaze, but for the first time there was no fury. Only defeat. Ray's voice broke the silence. The old Marine, who had watched every second, leaned forward in his chair. His words carried steady weight. "That man just showed you the meaning of respect," Ray said. His tone wasn't sharp, wasn't mocking. It was truth. You'd do well to remember it. The words hit Razor harder than any blow. Dan bent down, picked up the Marine Corps pin from the floor and placed it gently back on Ray's jacket. A small nod passed between them, unspoken recognition between two men who understood sacrifice. And in that quiet moment, Everyone in the cafe finally understood who Dan really was. Not just a stranger, not just a fighter, a guardian. The cafe was silent except for the ragged breathing of beaten men. Shards of ceramic glittered on the floor, steam still hissed from the espresso machine, and the air smelled of spilt coffee and sweat. The chaos of the fight had left the room in shambles, but what hung heaviest was not the mess. It was the weight of what everyone had just witnessed. Dan stood in the center of it all. His chest rose and fell in calm rhythm, his hands relaxed at his sides, his cap still shadowing his eyes. He wasn't posing as a victor. He wasn't basking in the stunned silence. He was simply steady, like a mountain after a storm, unshaken while everything else trembled. Razor lay on the ground, groaning, clutching his ribs. His crew was scattered around him. Tommy kneeling and pale, Spike slumped against a wall, Carl still doubled over from the blow to his ribs. They looked nothing like the pack of predators who had swaggered in minutes ago. Now they looked broken, humbled, stripped of the power they thought made them untouchable. A young woman in the corner whispered. He took down all 5 of them. Her voice trembled in disbelief. The man next to her just nodded, his phone still frozen in his hand, camera pointing but forgotten. Ray finally stood. Slowly, carefully, the old Marine pushed himself upright, his one arm steadying against the table. He walked toward Dan, his boots crunching over broken porcelain, his eyes bright with a quiet pride. Dan bent slightly, picking up the Marine Corps pin that had been thrown to the floor earlier. He brushed it off gently as though handling something sacred, then pinned it back onto Ray's jacket with deliberate care. The gesture was small, but the room felt it, every heart tightening with the unspoken weight of respect. "Thank you," Ray said, his voice low but strong, "for standing where you didn't have to." Dan gave the faintest nod. "Respect is earned," he replied, "and it's defended." For a long moment, the 2 men simply looked at each other. Soldier and guardian, different generations bound by the same code. It was a connection deeper than words, one everyone else could sense, but few could understand. Razor groaned, dragging himself into a sitting position. His face was red with shame as much as pain. His eyes darted to the people around him, every customer staring, phones recording, the weight of judgment burning hotter than his bruises. "You," he rasped, glaring weakly at Dan. "You embarrassed me." Dan stepped closer, not menacing but steady. His voice carried enough strength to cut through every whisper in the cafe. "No," Dan said firmly. "You embarrassed yourself. You disrespected a man who deserved honor, and you thought fear would win you respect. It doesn't, it never will." The words were sharp, final. Razor flinched as though they hurt more than any strike. His crew avoided his gaze, shame crawling across their faces. From behind the counter, Lena finally found her voice. She stepped forward, her hands still trembling but her eyes steady. "You should leave," she said to the bikers. "All of you, before the police get here," Tommy muttered. "Boss, she's right." Spike wiped blood from his nose, avoiding Razor's glare. Even Carl, once hesitant, now looked at Razor with something like disappointment. The fight had broken more than their bodies, it had cracked their loyalty. Razor tried to stand, but his knees buckled. Dan reached out, not to strike but to hold him upright for a brief second. The gesture was controlled, almost merciful, before Dan let go and Razor sank back down. "You're not weak because you lost," Dan said quietly, only for Razor to hear. "You're weak because you never understood respect." The words lingered like a sentence. Finally, with effort, Razor motioned to his crew. "We're leaving," he growled, though the fight had bled all the power from his tone. One by one, the bikers limped toward the door, shoulders hunched, eyes low. No more swagger. No more threats. Just silence broken only by the shuffle of their boots. Razor paused at the doorway, his back to the room as though struggling with words he had never spoken before. For a heartbeat, it seemed he might turn, might apologize, might admit what had been shown to him. But pride still shackled him. He clenched his jaw, said nothing, and limped out into the daylight. His crew followed, shadows of the men who had stormed in. The cafe door closed behind them with a hollow chime. Silence followed, thick and heavy, until suddenly, applause. It began with one pair of hands, tentative and unsure. Then another, louder. Then the entire cafe erupted, clapping, cheering, voices rising like a wave of relief and admiration. That was incredible, someone shouted. Unbelievable, cried another. Lena leaned across the counter, her voice choked but grateful. You saved us, all of us. I don't even know your name. Dan adjusted his cap, his gaze steady but humble. Doesn't matter, he said. Just doing what had to be done. Ray stepped beside him, lifting his voice so everyone could hear. That's what honor looks like. Not anger, not fear. Discipline, respect. The room hushed, letting the words sink in. People nodded, some wiping tears, others clutching their chests as though holding on to the feeling. Dan glanced around the cafe, saw the faces, the gratitude, the respect. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened, the faintest flicker of humanity breaking through the soldier's mask. Then he turned back to Ray. The two men exchanged one last nod, unspoken understanding passing between them like a torch. Ray sat again, carefully but with a lighter heart. He looked at the pin on his jacket, gleaming once more, and whispered almost to himself, still guarded. Always guarded. Dan adjusted his jacket, headed toward the door. He paused briefly, glancing back just once at the cafe full of people who would never forget what they had witnessed. Then he stepped outside into the sunlight, disappearing into the hum of the town as if he'd never been there. But the memory would stay. The story would spread, and in the cafe that morning everyone learned the same truth. Respect isn't given by fear. It's earned through sacrifice, and sometimes it's defended by guardians we don't even recognize until they stand between us and the darkness. The sun was higher now, spilling gold across Main Street as the town carried on with its day. Cars passed, kids laughed, life continued. Yet inside the brew the air still hummed with what had just happened. The cafe was a mess, but no one cared. The memory of that morning had already carved itself into the walls. People would talk about it for weeks. How 5 bikers stormed in with arrogance, how fear rippled through the room, and how one quiet stranger stood against them all, not with rage, not with cruelty, but with control, with precision, with a kind of discipline most people had never seen before. For Ray, the moment went deeper. As he sat in his chair, his fingers brushed the Marine Corps pin now back in its place. The small emblem gleamed brighter than it had in years. He thought of brothers who never came home, of the weight of silence carried by soldiers long after the battle ends. And for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. Someone else, another generation, carried that same fire. Guardians didn't disappear. They endured. Lena moved carefully through the cafe, checking on customers, apologizing for the chaos, though her eyes kept drifting toward the door where Dan had walked out. She couldn't shake the image of him, steady, calm, disappearing without a name. Heroes weren't supposed to be so ordinary, but maybe that's what made them extraordinary. By afternoon, the videos had already hit the internet. Grainy clips from shaking phones spread like wildfire. One man takes down 5 bikers in under a minute. Headlines grabbed attention, comments flooded in, people debated, speculated. Some called him a martial arts master, others a veteran. A few whispered he must have been law enforcement. But the truth was simpler and heavier. He was a tomb guard, and his oath followed him everywhere. Somewhere down the road, Razor and his crew sat in silence. Pride wounded deeper than bruises. For the first time, Razor couldn't shake the look in Dan's eyes, the unshakable calm of a man who had nothing to prove. That look haunted him, forced him to ask questions he had avoided his whole life. Maybe fear wasn't respect. Maybe strength wasn't control. For the first time, Razor wondered if he had been wrong all along. Back in the brew, customers returned to their routines. Coffee poured again, conversations resumed, laughter returned in fragments. But under it all lingered a quiet reverence. They had seen something rare, something that left them changed. Not just a fight, but a reminder. Ray finally closed his book, the ruined pages still stained with spilled coffee, but he didn't mind. He sat straighter, his heart lighter. He glanced toward the empty seat where Dan had sat and whispered softly, "Still guarded?" Always guarded. The story of that morning would become legend in the town, a tale retold with awe and reverence. People would say, there was a man who stood against 5, not for glory, not for pride, but for respect. And though Dan Rivera vanished into the rhythm of life, his presence lingered in every corner of the cafe, in every heart that had watched him stand unshaken. Because some guardians don't need monuments, some don't wear medals, some simply live their oath quietly, stepping forward when the world needs them most. And that morning in a small-town cafe, respect was defended, not with fear, but with honor.